Good evening. I'm Harriet Hamassi, University Librarian at Brown. On behalf of the library and Brown University, I want to welcome you to this evening's event. We're excited about the speakers, but we're also so pleased to see such a wonderful group of people here tonight. This event commemorates the inauguration of the Brown University Thriller Archive. Now you might ask, what is a thriller archive? The purpose of this archive is to bring to Brown manuscripts and other forms of intellectual communication and exchange from well-known as well as aspiring thriller writers. We believe that the Thriller Writer Archive is one of a kind. We don't know of another university or another library or archive that collects material from a single genre, such as thrillers. And we're delighted to be able to present the speakers tonight as well as samples of manuscripts from the writers themselves. This event is sponsored in part by the Friends of the Library, and I also want to say that the idea of the archive itself came from the membership of the Friends of the Library. A very special person, Jon Land, who is on the stage tonight and will be facilitating the conversation. Jon presented this idea a couple of years ago, in fact, and we've had a lot of time to think about it and to plan for it. And I think it is really a wonderful addition, not only to the Brown Library, but to the Brown campus and the kind of exploration and understanding, intellectual inquiry that will exist among our students and faculty. We're so pleased to be able to collaborate on this project with the International Thriller Writers Organization, of which Jon is a member, and also a number of our speakers tonight are members. I want now to introduce you to the chair of the Friends of the Library, Brown alumnus, Jeff Schreck.
Good evening. As Harriet mentioned, the Friends of the Library is one of the co-sponsors of the event this evening, and I encourage you, if you're not a member, to consider joining our organization so that we can help continue to support the library in its various projects. It is my pleasure to introduce Jon Land this evening, and he told me not to worry about saying too many nice things about him. Jon is a Brown University class of 1979 and is a very active member of the Brown community. He is events chair and a longtime member of the Friends of the Library. He's also vice president of marketing for the International Thriller Writers. He continues his association with Brown as alumni advisor to the Greek system, vice president of the Brown Football Association, and past president of the Brown Faculty Club. He's an alumni president of Delta Phi Fraternity and winner of the 2011 Dave Zacconi Brown Pride Award. Through his leadership of the Friends of the Library and the International Thriller Writers, he has helped to spearhead this relationship with the Brown University Library and the panel discussion which celebrates that association this evening. He's an award-winning author in his own right. He wrote his first thriller as a senior thesis in English here at Brown. Jon has gone on to publish 32 books, including national bestsellers, some of which feature female Texas Ranger Keatlin Strong, for those who are familiar with it. Last year, Jon published his first nonfiction effort, Betrayal, a book that chronicles the futile attempts of one FBI agent to end the bloody activities of Whitey Bulger. Jon's latest book, Pandora's Temple, features the return of his best-selling series hero, Blaine McCracken, after 15 years, and that book debuts at tonight's event with the official publication next week. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Jon Land.
Am I on? Am I on? Well, you can hear me anyway. Unlike, just a very important announcement before we get started. Men's soccer won. We don't know where or when they're playing next yet, do we, Margaret? We don't know yet, so we're going to find out. If we get more word before the end of the thing, we're going to pass it on to you. What, Kelly, what is it? At Maryland on Sunday. We were hoping for a home game, I guess, so your ticket office could have gotten a little better. You know, I'm the only one on the stage who needs an introduction. None of these other writers. We have before us 1 billion books in print. Not a billion.
Most of which are yours.
I sold like 14 books. All these books get published. Nobody buys them. These guys and ladies, a billion books. But I'm going to turn to the person who recruited me into ITW. Who actually, the only reason we're all here tonight is because of you, because you got me there, and it's the butterfly effect. Aren't you happy that all this happened?
I'm glad we did that.
Isn't that nice? But in a totally impartial review by the Providence Journal's leading thriller reviewer,
A wonderful publication, by the way.
writing about the Columbus affair,
Brilliant publication.
a wonderful paper.
Yes.
This was the last line of this totally impartial review. There is simply no one today writing better or more satisfying thrillers than Barry, and this one, The Columbus Affair, is not to be missed. Steve Barry, what is a thriller?
Gosh. The eternal question we get asked all the time.
I figured
I'll give you the stock answer that we use in ITW some, and it's the best we could ever come up with. In a mystery, something happens and the protagonist goes along and solves that. You take it step by step and you do it. In a thriller, something happens, then the protagonist has to either prevent something from happening or cause something else to happen that has something to do with that thing that happened. There's an extra element in the plot. That's the best we can come up with, is it?
I think you cleared up everything.
It's very difficult because there's a lot of crossover. There really is a lot in there to do it. They're very similar, thrillers and mysteries and all of them are similar. It's hard to put a finger on it. It's very much like Potter Stewart said about pornography years ago. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it when he saw it. And that's the same with a thriller. I don't know what it is, but when I see it, I know what I can tell you that's it. Yeah.
Now, my next question is actually...
Wait, is that pornography or thriller?
Either one.
I actually want to... I have... The next question was supposed to be for Bob Stine, but that makes me think a question for Nelson. The great Neslon DeMille. Do you think... and it just so happens, now that we're moving to...
We have another impartial statement from the Providence Journal.
I'm a little out of order. The first line, now this is great.
Wait. He's the great Neslon DeMille, and I get skipped.
Nelson's new novel, The Panther, opens with this line: "If Earth had an anus, it would be located in Yemen." The only line that rivals that is the opening of Dirty White Boys by Stephen Hunter, and if you want to know what it is, look it up. But my question, Nelson, is Steve gave a great definition of thriller, but your thrillers, especially the more recent ones, Wildfire and the have had huge stakes. When you're writing something where literally there could be a nuclear, which is Wildfire, or The Panther, it's getting the terrorist who did the coal before he does something else terrible.
Yeah, well, I think maybe the genesis of thrillers goes back to the Cold War. I wrote a couple of Cold War novels. which were very successful. The Cold War ended. I was unhappy about that. But, the rest of the world liked it, but it put me in a. But I wasn't making my reputation doing the Cold War novel. But I think this was the genesis of the thriller. Cold War's over, and we're not really writing retrospective Cold War novels. So what do? We got the war on terrorism, or other things. There's a lot of cabals out there, whether they be neo-Nazis or the Red Chinese, who knows what, but you got to bring them into it. I think that partly makes it thrillers. It should have a bigger stage and an international implications, or implications that are so big that it's going to lead to, it's going to lead to a nuclear explosion or bio-warfare, and that, I think, is one of the elements of the thriller.
Now, I might add that same impartial reviewer for the Providence Journal
Right.
wrote about The Panther. It satisfies at every level, establishing its rightful claim as the best thriller of the year and cementing DeMille's status as the finest storyteller alive today, which the other 4 people might take issue with.
Now, wait a minute. The Provost General just said that I was the master of it.
No, you're the master. He's the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't know.
It's tough coming up with the right adjectives. I have a question for the audience. Raise your hand if either you or one of your children has ever read an R.L. Stine book. Raise your hand. Wow.
Wow. The whole class.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know something? You're in for a treat. Because R.L. Stine, Bob Stine's new book, is not a children's book. It is an adult horror story, an adult thriller called Red Rain. And strangely, I have a copy of the review. And it is, since he is always, let me see. It was Stephen King, who mastered the concept of extraordinary things happening to ordinary people, a formula with which Stine has always been comfortable. Millions of the readers who grew up with him are all grown up now, and he has grown up with them, producing a masterpiece right out of the box. I'd say Stine will have a rough time topping this one, but after 100+ books, it seems like he's just getting started. But Bob Stine, why an adult book? Why make the move?
It's about time I grew up. In all these years, writing for 10-year-olds. Now, you said it. My readers grew up. This is the 20th anniversary of Goosebumps. And, yeah, I know.
Very happy audience.
Thank you. 20 years of writing this stuff. And those kids who read it back in the early 90s are now in their 20s and early 30s, and I keep in touch with them on Twitter all day. No, it's a wonderful way.
You tweet?
He does.
I'm on all day long. It's a horrible. I don't write anymore. Just on Twitter, and I keep in touch with my old audience, seriously, and they said, write something for us, write something for us. And that's really why I wrote Red Rain.
Now I have a follow-up question. Even though this is an adult novel, children play a very important role.
Well, my first thought in writing it was to do evil children. Because, see, I thought people would find it funny, since I've written so many good children over the years, if I did evil children. And then I got really interested in twins, because people are scared of twins. People find twins scary. And, no, they do. Don't look at me.
No,
Don't look at me.
All you twins in the audience.
Yeah. No, all through history, there have been all kinds of superstitions about twins. There were even people who thought that twins started out as animals, like an animal litter, and then became human. And there were people who believed twins controlled the weather. And even today, well, I was talking to a woman a couple weeks ago. I was being interviewed by a young woman, and she said, I'm scared of twins, and I'm a twin. So I thought that would be a good subject for a horror novel.
Lisa, I will read now your new book, which is Catch Me, although the new one just got here. It's got to nobody else has it except you and I right now.
True.
This reviewer really has great taste. 'Cause he or she, in the reviewing Catch Me, said, this is Gardner at her absolute best, making Catch Me as unique as it is absolutely impossible to put down. That same reviewer, in a past review, called you the master of suburban terror. Do you agree with that? And if you do, what does it mean to you?
Oh, John, I like you very much. One of the things I love about the thriller genre, and in all our years together, Steve has never asked me this question, but I can define a thriller. I think in a mystery, the suspense is derived from what already happened. In a thriller, the suspense is derived by what will happen next.
That's an excellent definition. That's
All
really
these
good.
years, Steve,
That's very
all
good.
you had to do was ask.
You put my little explanation very simple.
It made way more sense than what you said.
And I'm going to steal that one too, by the way. Perfect.
I don't even know what Steve said. But one of the things when you're looking at the suspense of what's going to happen next is we have a huge globe to play with. We can have Cold War, we can have twins, we can have history, we can have assassins with a conscience, and you can have your husband. And I believe all the women in the audience will support me on this one. I guess I was always inspired by Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. And I think it's probably maybe more of a female thing, but always wondering, when you fall in love, did you choose well or did you choose poorly? And I've always been fascinated by the notion of Ted Bundy, one of our more prolific serial killers, who did get married and father a child on death row. And that was the basis of my first two novels, The Perfect Husband, the poor woman who discovered in Massachusetts that the serial killer the police were looking for was actually her husband, and The Other Daughter, which was a young girl adopted into a Boston wealthy family, discovering that the father she never knew was the most notorious serial killer in Texas. So they're very charming. You should read them. You'll sleep well at night.
Now, I have a special surprise for David Baldacci, because I got a copy of a review that hasn't even run yet.
You've already shot your wad. Just stop.
Well, all right, well, I have something better than a review then.
Oh, he brings you
I have
a
something.
Shamelessly brings the book.
It's story time, ladies and gentlemen. It was the first time Puller had seen men fly without benefit of an aircraft. Or so it seemed. Their feet left the floor like they were attached to piano wire, and someone had just hit a switch, lifting them skyward. I detect in the last two books a change in tone. From the man who wrote Absolute Power, the man who's been called by not just the reviewer for the Providence Journal, but plenty of others, the master of the political thriller, a move into neo-noir, almost action-adventure, kind of like Taken. If it had been a book, you would have written it. You know, with Brian Mills as Liam Neeson's character. Puller reminds me so much of him. Why the change, David, or am I wrong? Has there been no change?
Well, I think writers can go in one of two directions. They can say, how did I do it before? And write a new book based on how they did it before and just change the names of the characters. Or they can say, how can I do it differently? Because we don't want to bore ourselves either. And if you've written, a certain type of genre, a certain type of novel year after year, it's nice to sort of stretch your wings and try something else. And I know a lot of people in the military. My dad was in the military, and a lot of my uncles were. And I have a lot of friends who said, you should try something about the military. And when I was growing up in Virginia, there was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history lived in Virginia. His name was Chesty Puller, Louis Chesty Puller. And he had a son who fought in Vietnam who was horribly injured as well. And I wanted to write about a character like that. I like writing about the gray. The world is not black and white. And the gray, the flawed characters, good people do bad things and bad people sometimes do good things. And to figure that out, I think makes for a good story. And I agree with Lisa's definition. I mean, a thriller is sort of a mystery on steroids, and the stakes are a lot higher, and you want to be scared to turn the next page so you don't know what's going to happen. And Lisa and I, by the way, are going to take over the PR messaging for...
It'd be better. I like that.
So I think it's to freshen things up and attack something else in a different way and challenge yourself to do something maybe you're not comfortable with, because the passion has to stay there. If the passion's not there, then you should go and do something else.
Now, in addition to changing within the genre, this is also the first time. Am I correct in saying that this is the first time you've had a recurring hero?
Yeah, no, that would not be correct.
Okay, I lied.
Yeah, you did. Go back and look at your other reviews of my books. Okay. And they'll
Talk about the recurring hero.
John is also a fiction writer.
My memory is going. It's just about gone now. So talk about Puller then. Talk about as he evolves from book to book, as this becomes a series.
Well, I think with John Puller, you're going to see that he has a lot of baggage. I set him up with a lot of personal baggage. His father's a 3-star. He should have been a 4-star. Should have won the Medal of Honor, but didn't because of politics and the military. He's in a VA hospital now, slowly dissolving into dementia. He thinks he's still commanding the 101st, but he's not. And his brother, John Puller's brother, is in USDB, which is the highest security military prison in the military system. And we don't know why he's there, and that's sort of foreshadowing I'm late for future books. This is the first time I've written a series where I knew it was going to be a series. All the rest sort of just the Camel Club and King of Maxwell just sort of happened, and I kept writing them. This is the one where the first time I ever sat down and planned out it was going to be a series. So whenever people write in and they say, why didn't you explain what happened to your brother, the brother in the book? I say, well, that's for a future book, you know, so you have to hang on and wait and see. So I don't know what's going to happen either. I never know how the book's going to end before I sit down and write it. It's sort of journey I take too. I don't really write from detailed outlines. I just kind of let it rip.
So Nelson, maybe I'll be wrong again, so I'll go 2 for 2. I do seem to recall an interview with you from maybe 10 or 12 years ago where you said you really never wanted to write a series character. You never wanted to bring somebody back. And yet you have created in John Corey an iconic series character.
Yeah.
What attracted you to Corey? Where did he come from? Why are you continuing to, what made you break your own rule?
I have to ask you, how do you remember 10 or 12 years back? I don't remember what I had for
I can't even remember how many books had other characters.
I probably said that, no. And I had, all my books had been standalone books, and I think there were, at that point, maybe 10 of them. I never really wanted to do a series character, although other people did it successfully. But I wrote this first John Corey book, which was Plum Island, but it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be a standalone book, and if you read it, you see it's a standalone book. And I thought I had a very clever plot. It was like the plot I'd been working on, and I thought the writing was great, and everything was good about this book. Then a fan mail came in, and it was all about my character, John Corey, not about my writing, not about, not about the plot. It was about this guy who I created, and I thought about it, and I went to my editor, and I said, I think we should bring this guy back. And she said, of course, people are doing series all the time. It's challenging, though, because it's easier actually to, and I think maybe everybody will agree, it's easier to do a standalone book because you can make up the whole world of the book. You don't have to go back and read your own book to figure out what color hair this guy had and if he was married or whatever. But having gotten into it and it's successful, I think the reader is comfortable, and we all grew up on series. I grew up on Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers. You grow up on these things, but you don't think you're going to write them yourself because they didn't seem like the kind of thing that was happening anymore. But I think it's kind of come back. The series character has come back. The reader likes the recurring character, and I have now become a convert to the recurring character. John Corey pays the rent. He's a good guy. I like him now. I've come to terms with John Corey. The newest one, The Panther, is the 6th book in the John Corey series. And I'm not going to do what Conan Doyle did, which was to kill him off like he did to Sherlock Holmes. Although there are days I want to kill him off. but because he pays the rent, we're going to keep him alive and around for a while.
Now, Steve Barry, you did the opposite. You have Cotton Malone, who's been, your bread and butter. And then with the Columbus Affair, you introduced a new character. Why did you make that change? Why did you break the paradigm?
Cotton called. He called me one day.
What did he say? What did he say?
He said, you've been blowing up my bookshop. You've been causing me problems.
Kidnapping my kids.
I can't insure the building. No one will work here. And he asked for a year off. He just said, I need a year off. And so I think it's more what David just said. You tend to want to try something a little different. You want to try something, every once in a while you want to do it a little different. So it was a different world, a different character, different motivations, different everything. He's not an agent. He's a journalist and disgraced journalist in that regard. And so he has to use different kinds of skills to get himself in and out of trouble. So it was fun. It was different.
How did your readers respond to not having Cotton?
Well, I was careful. Now, I didn't go too crazy with it. I still kept it action, history, secrets, conspiracies, international studies. It's still an international suspense thriller, so I didn't go too far afield. We were targeting the similar audience. You know, it wasn't where I was going outside the genre. So I kept it there. But they were fine. They liked it a lot.
It did feel to me like it was a more personal book.
It intentionally was that way. I did that a lot. Like I called the characters all by their first names. I made this on purpose. Even the bad guys, I called by their first name, which I never do. I always use I call it psychic distance. I tightened the psychic distance of the characters down, and I only had 4, and I kept it very intimate. And it was a little more character-driven and a little closer, and I did that on purpose. Yeah.
It felt, Lisa, what Steve just said about, and what I intimated about a more personal story. I would say your stories are intensely personal.
Oh, see, I think you're reading way too much into this. I think they're all bragging. I think the truth is we all make this up as we go along. I think Bob and I would say we definitely make this up as we go along. I think the truth is, as writers, the world is filled with bright, shiny objects. And you run across that idea that just sings to you. And you know this is the book that has to be written. And it could be the woman trying to escape from a serial killer husband. Or I will confess and Catch Me, the book that's out now, it was about a woman who saw her own murder coming. And I just thought, wouldn't that be cool to know you were dying in 4 days? And wouldn't it be cool if you're a detective for once in your life to try to prevent a murder? Because she goes to Detective Dee Dee Warren and says, I'm going to be murdered in 4 days. All my friends have, same day, same time. 4 days, it's my turn. If you're a detective, wouldn't that be intriguing? I mean, you don't have any jurisdiction. Legally, it makes no sense whatsoever. But it's a great idea. And I think what brings us all to the table is that idea we can't resist. And I think what brings readers to books is it's a bright, shiny object. And it's a lot of fun to spend, 4 to 6 to 8. You should all read slower, except for Bob. We will all tell you, please read slower. But that's the fun. If we get impassioned, you get impassioned, and you get to that last page. And I do want you to believe in my characters, since I'm writing about the people you should know. And trust me, you'll know them all. You're like, oh yeah, that's my neighbor. Oh crap, that's me, damn it. But it's the bright, shiny object that brings
Bob,
us all to the table.
is that where Red Rain came from? Was it a bright, shiny object to make these twins
Evil twins.
Yeah, where did that come? That's a disturbing
Harbor.
thing.
Well, it just came in pieces. Usually I get a whole idea, like for a Goosebumps book. I almost always start with the title. Almost always. Backwards from everybody, right?
That is different.
Everyone gets an idea and works on it and then thinks of a title. I have to have the title first. And the title always leads me to a story. One day I was walking my dog in the park and these words popped into my head. Little Shop of Hamsters. And I thought,
Does that happen often for you, David?
thank God it does.
Very strange. Yeah. That's a strange combination of words to pop into your
It's
head.
a great title.
It is a great
title. How do I make hamsters scary? That's the next one. And then I start thinking, well, what if there are hundreds of them? What if a boy gets trapped with hamsters? And so I worked that way from the title on. And that's how. Red Rain was a little different. I had this idea about doing evil twins. I thought that would be a good thing to pursue. And I remembered these 3 horror movies that I loved. Village of the Damned, Children of the Damned, and Island of the Damned. Everything was damned. And I went back and I watched these films. And all 3 of them were about supernaturally evil children and really naive adults. In Island of the Damned, the kids are actually eating everyone on the island. They're cannibals. And the parents are going out saying, oh, let's go tenting tonight. Let's go camping. And they're setting up. They have no clue as to what's going on.
They never do.
No, they don't. And that's how I got started thinking about the book.
Now, I asked Steve Berry about fan mail, and did he get letters? Now, you're probably going to get letters from people saying, wow, this is an adult book, this is different. But you've also gotten a lot of mail from kids over
Well,
the
that's
years.
the best part. That's the best part of my job.
What do they say? What is a typical...
I get some very funny letters. Do adults write to authors? I don't know.
Not like they do to you.
No, kids, I get a
like you.
lot of mail. Most of them start out, Dear R.L. Stine, my teacher is forcing us to write to an author, and I chose you. I get a lot of those. This is a letter I got last. I'll tell you a couple good letters. All right, since you asked.
Since I asked.
This is a letter I got a few weeks ago. Dear R.L. Stine, I love your Fear Street books. I read them all the time. I have only one question for you. Why do they end without ever making sense? Dear R.L. Stine, I'm not very smart, but I like your books. That's a new one. That's a new one.
Wait, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Author to author, do you guys get letters from the Department of Corrections asking for signed nude photos?
Yeah.
We use those for barters in prison and jacket covers.
So
these
what
are
is
the
your
money.
policy on signed nude photos?
I don't really have one.
I'm learning things all the time.
To prisons?
I do think that's one of our larger reading populations.
We have a lot of time. I know that I've sent hardcovers, but they usually get sent back. They're not allowed, if you send it to an individual prisoner, it's got to be a paperback. Is that changed?
Or just a jacket cover. They use jacket covers for currency in prisons too.
Really?
Yeah.
Currency for what? What are they buying?
I never asked.
David,
It's a
we're
little too much information.
talking about anything that has to do with helping people who are less fortunate or in trouble or clearly in jail. You have been extraordinary in your efforts through your various foundations to give back to the community, literacy, famine. Your Wish You Well Foundation. Why? Where did this start, and why is it important to you?
Well, I guess it started when I was first published, and you would travel around to events around the country. Most of them had a Friends of the Library component, or you were at a library, or something related to the book industry. And you'd see what a huge problem illiteracy is in the United States. I mean, if you look in the Almanac, it says we have a 99.9% literacy rate in the United States. It's closer to 55% and falling. We have 1 million high school dropouts every year, and that sort of compounds the problem. But I mean, the simple fact is it's not just about reading another book on the beach and enjoying it. It's about being a member of the democracy. And if you can't read, you can't be an active participant in democracy. And if you're not an active participant, you're a lemming. And you're just led around and told what to think and believe. And we've seen many examples in history of catastrophic results coming from that. Nazism is one of them. So literacy is the key skill that you need to have to create opportunities and lead a better life. And it's a cyclical thing too. If you can't read, chances are very high your kids won't read, their kids can't read, their kids can't read. And that's why we started this connection with the Feeding Body and Mind with all the food banks around the country. So we've shipped over 1 million books to food banks that I've collected on my book tours over the last 3 years. Because people, if you put books in the forefront of their lives and literacy and reading skills, it allows them to actually become self-sustaining. And you would shudder to think, particularly at an institution like this, how many homes in the United States have never had a book inside of them. It is tens of millions of them. So it's something we should all be aware of. And there's almost no government money for adult literacy at all. And I asked someone in the field why that is, and they said, well, if you do that, the governments will acknowledge the K-12 program is a failure. And they're never going to do that, so that's why the money's not coming for that. So it's almost all private donations. It's the single most important thing. If we solve every other problem we have as a nation, we don't solve literacy, we can't solve every other problem we have as a nation. It's that simple.
Excellent.
Well
Nelson, last year at Thriller Fest, our big New York convention,
Right.
the big talk was Tom Cruise playing 5'6" or 5'7" Tom Cruise playing 6'6" 5" Jack
Yeah.
Reacher.
Right.
The iconic character from Our Friendly Child who really wanted to be here tonight but is currently in Europe. Lee had actually just seen the movie previewed, and he said it was really good, and people just have to put aside.
I read that, yeah.
What about, now you've had, The General's Daughter was adapted, you had John Travolta. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, well, it's every author's fantasy and nightmare at the same time. They're going to make your book into a movie. It's like, oh, great, or maybe not, And all right, but it was a major studio. It was Paramount, and we had some good screenwriters. William Goldman wrote the last version of the screenplay, and he's brilliant. This guy wrote Marathon Man, the book and the movie. Director was good. Mace Neufeld, the producer, was a friend of mine. But they hadn't cast it. And I'm thinking, Paul Brenner is, I have 10 people in my mind, and then they somebody called me and they said, we got John Travolta. And I said, what? I was like, John Travolta? Paul Brenner's South Boston Irish, and he's but the funny thing is, if an actor, and Travolta is a brilliant actor, he's got the range, and I didn't believe in this until I went to the set and I saw the rushes that they had done before, and I looked at it and I said, it's sort of like when Marlon Brando was the Godfather. I mean, nobody thought Marlon Brando should be the Godfather, but Marlon Brando became the Godfather because he's a brilliant actor. And Travolta is a brilliant actor, and the supporting cast was great. James Cromwell, Jim Hutton, Madeline Stowe, everybody put in a great job. Good director, good screenplay. That's why they call it acting. So, I mean, yeah. However, with the Cruise thing and the Jack Reacher, I mean, Reacher we all know is like this, and Cruise, but when you're filming, obviously, you can do anything. And Cruise, let me tell you, is going to look 6.5 feet tall in this film. Right?
It's time now for our first lightning round. What I'm going to do now is,
What?
I am just going to say something to each individual author, 5 different words or phrases, and just get their reaction. And I'm going to start. I think I'll start where we'll start with Nelson, because I just finished with you. 50 Shades of Grey.
Funny thing is, I didn't read it, but I don't know if my wife read it. If she did, she's saying no.
Oh, you know
Sandra?
she read
Right.
it.
No. To mean.
But when it first came out, and people didn't know what it was, but I knew what it was, because you're in the business, I would recommend it to very prim women who didn't know what it was about. And I did this at a cocktail party once. 3 very upper-class women, I said, and they said, I just made the conversation. I said, have you read 50 Shades of Grey? Well, you really ought to read 50 Shades of Grey. So I had fun with that for a while, until everybody caught on.
David, Stieg Larsson.
Sorrow, I think. That he wasn't around to enjoy this incredible
He didn't get to
success.
enjoy it, yeah.
And that's sort of, to spend your life writing brilliant books and not be there for it. I mean, I feel very happy for his heirs, although there's a big fight over the money, but still, I feel sorrow. Yeah. I'm glad you didn't ask me about 50 Shades of Grey.
Steve Berry, blank has done more for the thriller form than any other author.
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one.
I wouldn't even answer
Because
that
thriller's a big word. I mean,
Jon
there's-
Land with his reviews and the product. That would be
I wish I'd have thought of that. That's a
right
good
now for Jon Land.
It depends on what genre you're talking about.
Good
of a
point.
Thriller, If you're talking about my genre, international suspense thriller, then I would say Dan Brown, because he brought the genre back to life. I mean, it took me 12 years to get published. From the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word, I had 85 rejections of 5 different manuscripts. And it's because the genre was dead. It was dead. Now, if you were Nelson, you were in great shape. He had an audience. Wow. If you were David, he had an audience. These folks had an audience. I couldn't get an audience because no one would buy it. And then along came the Da Vinci Code, and the genre came back to life. ITW was born because of the Da Vinci Code. To do. That's where it came from. They brought the genre back to life, and that's why to this day, when I go into a bookstore and I see a Da Vinci Code, I stop and I bow.
I would say IRA 11. IRA 11.
Which IRA 11 book?
About all of them.
All of them?
He wrote Rosemary's Baby,
Boy,
Stepford, which maybe the best thriller ever written. I think. A perfect book. A Kiss Before Dying, The Stepford Wives. Unfortunately, he was a lazy bum. And no, he was. And you couldn't get him to write. He should have written twice as many books as he did. But to me, he's the most brilliant of all the thriller writers.
He certainly, every time he wrote a book, it was about something no one had written before.
That's right.
It's like he was inventing stuff. I mean,
Yes.
Now, Bob, you just said Rosemary's Baby. Now, normally, people would think horror. They would think Mia Farrow, and they would think the son of Satan. Lisa, can a horror novel be a thriller?
Why not?
Why
It's
not?
all about the suspense of what happens next.
Exactly right.
I go back to Steve Berry and my excellent
No, I like
definition.
your I'm stealing that, by the way. That's going to become my definition.
I think a horror novel is very much derived by what's going to happen at the bottom of those creaky attic stairs. I myself am a big fan of creaky attic stairs. My favorite scene I ever wrote was when a husband actually tried to take his wife out on a date, and she spent the whole time in the neighbor thinking, crap, this is the night he's going to kill me. And he wants witnesses to how much he loves me right before he shoves me into the ocean at
I'd
the
like to
Boston
meet
Harbor.
your husband.
He sleeps with one eye open.
Yeah, I think
But for the record, my husband in Rhode Island for a while automated machinery at a haunted house, a haunted hayride. Tim Layden's Field of Screams. You should really fear for our child.
Stephen King says that, you know, what you just said made me remember that Stephen King basically, his theory is that all writers are a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
Is it true? Are we all a little bit crazy?
I'd say except for me.
We listen to the voices in our head that tell us to kill. We write it down. But here's the funny part. Then publishers bring us to you. You tell me who's crazy.
Bob Stine, I have your lightning round question. Anyone out there writing a book should blank. Fill in the blank. Anyone out there writing a book should.
Buy Red Rain.
I don't know. I always say we don't need any more writers.
Stop, then stop. They should stop.
People say, what advice?
Don't stop.
Wait a minute. S-T-O-P.
Very good, yeah. People always say, what advice do you have for young writers? I said, well, we have all the writers we need, really.
H.L. Mencken, who was the great social critic and writer in the 20s, was asked that question. And he never spoke to people. He never did anything like this because he hated people. And people hated him. And, you know, I see some people nodding who've read H.L. Mencken. And finally, he agreed to speak in a group like this, about this size, and he came out and he had a speech. And he had this wild mane of hair, and it was blowing everywhere. He opened up his speech, and he looked out at the audience. He snarled, ripped up the speech, looked out again, and said, "Why the hell aren't you writing?" That was his advice. Lisa, just so you don't feel left out.
Okay.
Ebooks.
Oh, I like them. I'm a #1 best-selling author in ebooks. I did actually enjoy The Shades of Grey. I think of ebooks as democracy at work. For a long time, publishing has been controlled by basically 5 guys in New York, and it has been very much top-down. I think ebooks at the moment is giving, for the first time, new voices, new authors, new ideas, a chance to build from the ground up. I'm not so sure Amazon won't somehow cannibalize all of us in the making of the ebook market, writer and publisher alike. But the medium itself, I think, has promise. One of my things, and I think we talk about a lot on Thriller Fest, is in this day and age of branded authors, where authors aren't even allowed to die because when they do, a ghostwriter just picks up the pen. Where are the new voices? Where are the new talent? I think in any industry, you are as good as the next bright light. And I have a feeling that in the future, we may see more of them from ebooks than we're going to see from established publishers because they are so much. We are looking for Coke or Diet Coke or Coke with lemon. But if you are not a brand, we are not interested. And I think that's almost the antithesis of what publishing and the whole reading experience for all of us is supposed to be about. So for that alone, I like ebooks.
It's almost like ebooks right now where the established houses and authors are sort of like the broadcast networks, and sometimes ebooks are kind of like going off to cable. Where they do more interesting things. And you know, for me, it's always been, it's not important. The movies went through this years ago too, where the delivery system for a while became more important than the content. And then the movies took it back and said content is king and always will be, because whether you buy a Kindle or a Nook or a Sony or whatever, an iPad, and read on it, you're reading the content. It's not the device that's sort of driving you to buy books. So the content, and we provide the content. And industry always needs new voices, and otherwise it just slowly dies.
I mean, if you think of Robert Redford, the Sundance Festival, in publishing, we need that too.
Yeah.
And we have the independent bookstores, but unfortunately,
They're dying.
yeah, so I think it's an interesting frontier out there for all of us. And for those of you who have Kindles, it's okay.
So
We'll sign your Kindle.
Yeah, I would recommend you buy the ebook version and the hardcover and the paperback. And,
Yes.
And the trade
decide
paperback,
which one
too.
you like.
You should read on your Kindle, and you should buy us in hardcover for your bookshelf, and because it's an excellent gift.
Don't forget the audio. We have the audio.
And the audio tape, I'm sorry, for while you're on the subway.
Well, that's it. It's just format. I mean,
It's
it's
format.
format. You know, in the 1920s, when the pulp, not the pulp paperback, the paperback came
Yeah.
out.
I was just going to
They
say.
weren't pulps, they were classics in paperback form for, in those days, 35 cents,
Fawcett.
45 cents. You know, it opened it up to the masses. You didn't have to buy a leather-bound book with gilt edge anymore. You could buy, and people complained about it. This is not a book. This is like, you know, a cheap magazine or a lousy newspaper, because the format had nothing to do with it. The content was, in those days, classics, and then, of course, there was pulp literature that, you know, came out afterward. And then the audiobooks, and we all remember, you know, the audiobooks had great promise, but unfortunately the audio was like $69 or something. You could buy 3 hardcovers for that price. But then it came out the audio download, and you know, some people like the audio, some people like the ebooks. Others will only buy the hardcover, and other people wait for the mass market. And you're right, it's the content, it's not the format.
What about the business? How have ebooks, Steve, affected the business of publishing? Numbers, selection of authors.
The rules are changing. We've talked this on the walk over here. The good old days in publishing was 2 years ago. We talk about the good old days. And be honest with you, as far as ebooks go, the good old days was like 2 months ago. That's how rapidly that it's changing. And it's changing all the rules. But I was listening to what Nelson was saying. Let's go back a little bit further. You know, you hear all the time about how ebooks are going to destroy the world, you know. You remember when we used to chip into stone? You know, they chipped into stone, and somebody said, well, why don't we go get some mud and put it out on the ground and use our finger and write in it, the sun will dry it, look what we have, it's so simple. And everybody said, that's crazy, that'll never work, it's too fragile. What happened? Clay tablets took over and stone went away, right? Then someone went out into the marsh and found this papyri stuff, and they figured out how to make this papyri and write ink on it, and they said, that's insane, it'll never work, it's too brittle. And what happened? Papyri took over. Then they figured out they could kill animals and make parchment and make really thick paper that would hold up in thick substance. And they said, that's ridiculous, it takes forever. What happened? Parchment took over. Then paper took over. Now ones and zeros are taking over. Now, what in all of human history, every time that happened, only one thing occurred. It got bigger. It never once shrunk. Never one time in human history, and it won't shrink this time. We happen to live at the exact moment in human history when the delivery system of information is shifting. And we happen to be at that moment. Now, unfortunately for us, the rules are changing by the day. And they are. Ebooks are changing. Lawsuits have changed it. Everything is changing it. Are books going away? No, they're not going away. Only a tiny fraction of books are digitized. But over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years, the primary delivery system of information is going to shift from paper to electronic. It's not a bad thing. More people are reading today than ever in human history. More books are being sold today than ever in human history. You know, there's so much going on, and so it's not an awful thing. It's not the end of the world. It just happens to be a little chaotic because the rules are being made up by the day. You just have to adapt. You just literally have to adapt.
Steve and I come from the same publisher, Random House, which is the #1 digital publisher in the world. You could tell we drank the Kool-Aid. We sat through our meetings.
I don't know how it is for y'all, but the reality for me is 70% of my sales are E and 30% are traditional book. To give you an idea of what that was 3 years ago, it was 15% E and 85% book. That's the shift. You can see what's happened. So
I'm 70-30, I think.
I'm
most of the
70-30, so that train's left the station. You know,
Yeah.
it's done. It's not going back.
But that's okay. I mean, Apple sold 10 million iPads last Christmas.
That's right.
And I can tell you probably 9,990,000 of the people who bought those looked on there and they were like downloading the music and video streaming and stuff, and they happened upon this book button and thought, what the hell is this? You know, and you click on it and a book appears and you're like, a book?
Wow.
What is that? And they downloaded it and they read it and they were like, this is not bad.
This is not-
And maybe they downloaded another one. And I think everybody's sales benefited from this enormous quantity of iPads that were sold. And so many people who are into the electronic world, you know, are not really traditional readers, but they are becoming that because now they have a system that's in their sweet spot where they can download stuff and they can listen to music and watch movies and also occasionally read a book. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think most writers object to the ebook. It's the and what you had asked originally. It has to do with the numbers. The numbers. It's got to be fair, and we're still kind of feeling around for this. Publisher wants to make so much. Amazon wants to make it all. They're annoyed that they have to pay anybody anything. And they want to. But it's good for the publishers in one way in that it's kind of. A sale made is a sale made. There's no returns, and you know, and it's kind of a source of money for the publishers. It's the numbers that have to be worked out. The numbers always have to be worked out, and ultimately it does expand the market. And as you say, it brings people to reading who would not normally read.
Now, how does this impact you, Bob? Because coming from Goosebumps, where you had a younger audience, I can't see them on Kindles.
No, it hasn't really trickled down to children's books that much yet. It hasn't. Because for parents to buy a $500 iPad for their kid, that isn't happening so
Yeah,
fast.
but some of the Kindles are now $97 and stuff.
Yeah, I
see
mean, it
parents
will
buying-
happen.
Yeah.
But for the most part, children's books are pretty much books
Yeah.
still at this point. I think
I'm sorry, we are your
eventually,
future.
I think eventually textbooks will all be on the iPad. And kids will be given an iPad with their textbooks on it
True.
when they show up. And iPads are perfect for textbooks. The color, the page, everything is there. And then kids won't have to lug around these enormous backpacks
Yeah.
anymore.
Crazy, yeah.
They'll have it all on one skinny thing. I think that's fairly
Now,
inevitable.
Bob, staying with you, we're talking about the differences in marketing of books, but what about the writing? What was the biggest difference or the hardest, biggest challenge, how you want to cover it, between when you decided to do Red Rain, move into the adult genre? What was the biggest challenge for you?
Well, there were a lot of challenges. It's longer. You know, it took a lot longer than a Goosebumps book. And I did something I've never done before in my life with Red Rain, research. Never done. Never, you know, I always make up everything. I had to do research. But you know what, John? While I was writing this, I was thinking the same fears that go into the children's books are basically the same fears you put in an adult horror novel. It doesn't really change. You still have this fear of the dark, fear that someone is going to get you, someone is after you, fear that someone is lurking somewhere, fear of going to an unknown. That doesn't really change at all. And it made me think that one reason that adults like horror novels so much is that it allows them to revisit their childhood fears. So in a way, this is pretty philosophical for me.
It's very deep, yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
really deep here.
In a way, it's reading a horror novel for adult is in a way of staying a child.
They also want heroes.
That's my theory.
They also want heroes. And I think that's one reason why they read thrillers or mysteries or even horror, because at the end, you have an evil that needs to be vanquished, and you have somebody, and I like reading tales where the ordinary person becomes extraordinary because they have to. They don't have a choice. They have to sort of rise to the occasion or rise to the challenge and find things within themselves that can vanquish the boogeyman in whatever manifestation he might appear. And people like heroes. You know, you see it obviously in comic books and in movies and that, but they want to, when they close the last page, they want to feel okay about the world. You know, the nuke didn't go off. You know, the bad guy was vanquished. The good guy lives to fight again. And that keeps them going. And it's kind of a comforting feeling. And that works whether you're a child or whether you're 100 years old and still writing under the name V.C. Anders. So, you know, it's just the way it works. And I think it gives people a really comforting feeling. At the same time, they're being scared to death.
Do you find that you have to do happy endings?
No, I almost never do happy endings.
No, you don't?
I like to kill off people of consequence in my novels.
I can never do an unhappy ending in a kid's book.
No,
Never.
I get that.
I did it once, just for fun, for me, I wrote a Fear Street book in which, with an unhappy ending, and the good girl is taken off as a murderer, and the girl who did the murder is perfectly okay. And I just did it for me, for fun. It was the only unhappy ending. And the kids turned on me. Instantly. And I got a letter. Dear R.L. Stine, you moron. Oh, really? You idiot. How could you do that? Are you going to write a sequel to finish the story?
No, see, I would argue in your market, but I would think people don't read thrillers necessarily for the happy ending, but I think what they are looking for is resolution.
Resolution and some type of closure.
And I think, and having that explanation to the unanswered questions we can't get in real life. We are inundated as a society with true crime. You know, from O.J. Simpson to the Casey Anthony case down in Florida, which is the mother that got off for murdering her child, but everyone in America thinks she did it too. I think in a thriller, what people are looking for is not just that sense of justice, but this is exactly what happened at this time, and this is place, and this is why we have evil, and maybe the evil was really clever and got away with something that might be a little bit cool. But I think it's that sense that in the real news media cycle, things pop, and then they disappear. And we never really know what actually happened. Right. And I think in our entertainment, that's what we're looking for.
Fiction
this
has to
is
make
exactly
sense.
what happened.
Yeah, fiction has to make sense.
And everyone can be cool and clever and twisted, because that's actually kind of fun. And I interview with cops all the time, and like, if real criminals were only this clever, we'd have a real job to do.
But don't you feel, just based on the way the world is today, with so many problems, so many challenges, so much heartache, you don't have to look very far for the effects of Sandy, that don't you feel that people are reading thrillers in large part because the good guys do win in the end?
I think it's absolutely escapism, and I think the biggest thing to take away, I learned early on as a thriller writer, was you never let the villain get arrested. You always kill him or her, which shows something about Americans' concept of our criminal justice system. A just resolution is death to the bad guy. And that is the escapism. That's the closure, which I guess it's resolution and closure. Those are the things we don't always get in our everyday life.
But if you do let them live and you arrest them, they have to hire a lawyer, and that's pretty bad. I mean, they charge a lot of money, let me tell you.
Yeah, I'll let you and Steve get it.
I used to be one of them.
Used to. 30 years. Great. One of the smartest things I think I ever read, and I don't know where the quote comes from, is that great heroes are made by great villains. Let's talk about the importance of villains in the genre. I mean, you've had some pretty despicable guys who've done some bad things. How do you talk about your villains? Talk about villains in general.
They get hard to do because they can't all be the same. That's the problem. You know, they have to be different, and let's put it this way, they actually have to be the same but different. Mm-hmm. It's literally what you have to do, which is very difficult to do, to be the same but different. And it's a challenge for me each time to try to figure out something. So I look for some type of motivation, something in their past, something that triggers it. It's difficult to come up with it after I've done 11 now, and so 11, they're getting harder to make them distinguished and different to do. So that's the main thing, is to keep them the same. They have to be bad, but here's the thing, your bad guy has to have good qualities, and your good guy has to have bad qualities. You have to have a little of both in everybody to make them human. So I struggle. Characterization is something that I have to really work on hard. It's something that I struggle with and work very hard on and pay attention to. It's something that I have to be very conscious of to make sure that I work on doing that. It's always been a challenge for me. I think we all have something that we work on that's a little bit of a weakness here and there. Characterization is one that I work very hard on to do, to try to make it distinguished. And it's tough to come up with that because most of mine are foreign guys, so I try to find a different place, different locale. And they have to have a connection to the historical basis that I use too. See, I have that historical element in mind. So I always have to have that tie-in to the historical element. That complicates it a little for me.
Bob, who would you say, if we're talking about villains, who do we hold up and say these are some of the, or a
From
few?
Goosebumps?
In any yours or anybody else's?
I wrote this book, Night of the Living Dummy, and it was about Slappy, the evil dummy. This dummy that
Dummies are
comes to
scary.
life. Yeah, why?
I don't know. They're scary.
I've written about 7 or 8 dummy books about
Dolls are
Slappy
scary.
the dummy, and I just did I was appearing at a college in New York 2 days ago, and I cannot tell you how many kids say, Slappy gave me nightmares for weeks. I'm still scared of puppets and dummies, thanks to you.
R.L. Stine.
It's just a book, man. It's just a book. It's not real.
I had 7 years of therapy because of Slappy. This kid said that to me. Made my night. And I don't really understand why I keep writing him, of course. And he's just dummy. I love writing him because he's very rude and insults everyone. And then does a lot of evil things. But I don't really understand why people are scared of it. But I keep writing it.
You know, you mentioned dummies. I always think about how many people were terrified by Stephen King's It because of Pennywise the clown. Because there's something about clowns. And when I think about Stephen King, what Stephen King did was he took horror and he moved it out of the haunted house, he moved it out of the castle, and he moved it next door. And I almost think like, now Lisa, I'm gonna come back to you, because when you move the horror next door, how much different is it to move someone like Jerry Sandusky next door? To move the evil within us, not supernatural evil, not paranormal evil, not Pennywise the clown, but just people who can do terrible things, especially if they're victimizing children. Some of your books have covered that.
Well, I have to say Stephen King is my hero. That's who I grew up reading. Yeah. And one of the things I loved about him was his tendency to take the extraordinary and make it so ordinary. But I think the other principle that captivates me, and you just kind of nailed it, is periodically we get these headlines. 11 skeletons / mummies / bones removed from guy's basement. And there's always the neighbor. He's such an ordinary guy. He just seemed quiet.
But your villains fall into different categories, and some of them are psychopaths, and they kind of not that interesting, really.
But it's not the villain. It's not the guy who had the basement. It's the fact that you live next door to
Right,
that.
yeah,
That's the dichotomy I love. That all of us in this incredibly populated planet, whether we live in apartments or duplexes or frankly the suburbs, which I think is the scariest evolution of civilization yet, you don't actually know what's going on in the closed doors next to you. And that to me is somewhat the ultimate terror, that it's not the dummy, it's not the clown, it's the soccer mom that made you brownies last week. Watch her.
Well, they can be scary in and of themselves. It's not the point.
Well, David, in the first John Puller book, he rescues a kid. I mean, that brings him so much to life. I mean, when you can introduce, and the great thing about that book is it's defined so early, because someone who's, we're talking, you mentioned heroes before, things we can believe in. Is there any other more heroic act than helping a child, as opposed to Stephen King, when he first introduces the villain of the Dead Zone, Stilson, played by Greg Stilson, he's kicking a dog to death as a traveling salesman. There's just no way you can ever get past that. It's an irredeemable act. So, that's why I use the Taken allusion to your first Puller novel, because of the child.
He just associated you with people who kick dogs to death. I get him.
I'm going to address that right now, by the way. When I started writing, my kids were small, and I've never been able to really write a story about where a child is injured or killed. It's just kind of taboo for me. And that doesn't mean that I might not write about that in the future, maybe. I'm a big dog lover. I don't think I've ever killed a dog. I killed somebody, I killed a kid, but the dog survived. So that's just that doesn't sort of say where my loyalties lie, but it's, for me, part of the plot defines the character, obviously. And what a character does in a certain novel defines what that character is going to be throughout. And one of the things I wanted to do with this character was, what he did for a living was not that great. I wanted to give him a conscience and give him sort of a redeeming quality. And saving a child, when all of his instincts and what he was tasked to do was to not let that happen and just keep going. because those were his orders. I've always had suspicions of authority in life. So orders coming down from a higher chain of command, I look at just being sort of innately suspect. And I have great respect for the people who sort of execute those orders on the ground, not as much respect for the people who execute the orders. And that chain of command sometimes is a little tenuous, and there's all sorts of ulterior motives out there and secret agendas we never know about. And I write about a lot of that in my books because I'm not a conspiracy nut, but I understand that conspiracies do exist. And by the way, a conspiracy is defined simply as more than one person having the same agenda, and that sort of defines Washington, D.C. in general, and lots of other things that we sort of rely on in life. And it's fascinating to me to let the plot define who the character is as well, because they go part and parcel. You can't take one away from the other and have anything resembling a book. They always have to go together, and they have to go in sync. Sometimes they get a little bit out of sync, but that's part of the fun of the story as well.
Now, Nelson, everyone in this group has something else in common besides being great storytellers and immensely successful. No one in this group has yet added co-authorship to no one has gone to the Patterson model or the Cussler model, where you're actually writing more than 2 or 3 or 4 books a year. Have you ever been tempted to do that, and if not, why?
I actually did it once, John. You know, one of my
Mayday? But you were uncredited. It was Tom, weren't you uncredited?
Yeah, but then it was reissued as a credited, book.
Came out, it was Tom's.
A friend of mine, Tom Bach, USA Air pilot. I knew the kid since he was 5, and he was a USA Air pilot. And it was just a natural that we should do an airline disaster novel together. We didn't speak to each other for years afterwards. I had a sign up on my desk about collaboration. It was an old World War II sign from France that said, "Collaborators will be shot." And I never wanted to do it again. I mean, these two egos coming together. Obviously, one is going to be dominant, but when you grow up with somebody, you were 5 years old, he didn't think I was dominant. I tried to tell him I was the dominant party in this collaboration. But we butted heads. Funny thing is, at the end of the day, it was a hell of a, it was one of the classic airline disaster novels, made into a CBS TV movie with Aidan Quinn.
He's good.
Aidan Quinn, and
I like
played
him.
the pilot. That was a good movie for CBS TV. I mean, but no, I don't think I would do it. I like to do my own books. Yeah, but if you do it, and you do put the other name on it, I guess it's okay. The reader has to know what the reader is getting, as opposed to a ghostwritten, without mentioning authors. Some authors who actually have them ghostwritten without the collaborator's name. Put the collaborator's name, it's okay. The reader knows, this is, when I see Jim Patterson, when he writes them, he puts, whoever, and people want to buy them anyway. So, because he obviously has something to do with the book. He might have, he might be the plot guy. Whatever he does, he reads them. It's engineered. It's like having I can't even think of a good example, but a product that's actually got 2 things going for it, and it might actually make the book stronger in some ways. Which is what I found out with Mayday. But I would never do it again. Having said that.
I think collaborating would be really hard.
It's hard.
And at dinner, I was talking about, anyone read this mystery writer, Charles Todd, who writes these World War I mysteries
Reading one now.
about Inspector Rutledge from Scotland Yard. And Charles Todd is a mother-son writing team. How would that work? How could
We know which one would be the dominant party.
I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
We are going to be taking some questions if you have them. So there are 2 mics, one on either side, and anyone who has a question, while we're going through a few more rounds here, we can start getting people. If you don't worry about it, because I can go on. It's not a problem. Ooh, another lightning round.
Oh, God.
Steve Berry.
Why? Let David go first.
Okay, David.
Let David go first.
He's like my boss. I have no choice. David, a thriller should never blank.
Bore.
I was thinking disappoint. Good. Lisa.
That was an easy one. I should have had that
too
one.
easy.
That was a good one.
I got a lot of witnesses here who made me say, you made me move on.
You gave him a
Lisa,
you lobbed him.
a thriller should always.
Surprise.
I would say give the reader goosebumps.
I bow down.
Good answer. Good answer.
Nelson. Dan Flowers, how you doing? Get some good shots now. Nelson, Nazis, Soviets, radical Islamic terrorists. Next.
Next, oh gosh, investment bankers.
Great answer.
Right up there.
Ooh, what?
The most important or influential book I ever read was?
Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. Hey, I didn't have to think about that.
You know what?
That book has to be the most underrated book in history. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. It's a beautiful book. And just this depiction of this Midwestern childhood in a time that probably never existed, but is so real, and really makes you, bad for my horror image, but makes you cry on every page. Honestly, I read it once a year just to remember what good writing is about.
I have felt and said innumerable times that the best written book I've ever read is Something Wicked This Way Comes, also by Brett. It is a perfect lyrical study, and I remember seeing an interview with him, one of the last ones he did, before he really got sick, where he said he hadn't read the book in 20 years, and he picked it up and read it again and started to cry himself because he realized he had written it about his father, the janitor character in Something Wicked This Way Comes. And he never realized that himself. Steve Berry, a thriller hero is?
A hero.
Define a hero for us. What's a hero?
Well, you would say a guy who does the right thing, but that's not usually the correct thing. The right thing isn't the correct thing.
Is it about the reason why he does it? Is it ends justify the means?
He may even do the wrong thing, but for the right reason. As long as he's in the right reason, you gotta root for the guy. You can't. I do blurbs. I read about 25 books a year for blurbs, and these are new writers who are coming out, and I was one once, so I never say no really because I remember what's tough for me, so I do it for everybody. But I will read these books sometimes, and I just hate the protagonist. And, there's just nothing. It's not a hero. They're doing things for the wrong reasons, and they're doing it. You got to have the right reason in there. You got to, when you're done with that hero, you got to say, I like that guy. I want to be that guy. I would be him. That's what you got to feel that when you're done. If you don't, it's not really to me satisfying. Not that you can't have a negativity, but I just like my hero to be a hero.
So let's talk about heroes. What was the first thriller, in your mind, the first thriller ever? Go back as long as you want.
Wow. Well, I mean, David Morrell would say it goes all the way back to the Greeks.
Yeah.
That's what he would say, all the way back to the Greeks. Yeah.
Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Sure.
The quest story.
Yeah, we have our 100 greatest thrillers
Yes.
that David Morrell wrote. He accumulated the 100 greatest thrillers, and he did them based on what their significance was into the genre. And he went all the way back there. Yeah. He said it goes definitely back there.
Probably goes back further.
Even further.
Probably these primitive groups out on the prairie, or people huddled under trees, or something at night, all day long, a struggle to stay alive. And then at night, they probably told themselves stories, and they had to be thrillers, right?
Gave themselves
they told
goosebumps.
themselves they had to be scary stories. Probably all through time.
Mythology would have a lot of thriller aspects. Sure.
Yeah.
Lisa, what makes a hero?
I think it's rising to the challenge. I am drawn to the ordinary person, drawn to extraordinary things. Whether that is a detective going to the ends of the earth to find justice for a victim, whether that's a mother going to the ends of the earth to protect her family. I think that's the kind of stuff we want to identify with. We sit at home in our armchairs or on our sofas and we think, well, yes, if I was in that situation, I would rise to the challenge. I would try to protect my neighbor. I'd try to protect my family. I might not be perfect and I might make, minor bad decisions in my life, but if push came to shove, these are the things I'd be willing to fight for. And I think it's that kind of rousing, kind of impassioned action sequences that get to us all too. That's part of the vicarious thrill of reading them, of thinking that I would try to do this too, even though I have no skills and I have no idea what I'm doing.
David, it almost sounds like she was describing your hero from Absolute Power in many ways. My question is, Absolute Power was your first book. I don't want to get it wrong again.
No, you're right.
First book, tremendous success, made into the Clint Eastwood movie. What's the hardest thing? What's the biggest challenge about having so much success right out of the box?
Well, when the book was sold, I was sort of deemed to be an overnight success, and it's true, I was. It took me about 7,000 nights to get there. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. I was trying to sell short stories to the New Yorker when I was in high school. And all I had known for the first 20 years of my writing life was just rejection after rejection after rejection. And I wrote pretty much everything you could possibly write. And it seemed really very little to show for it. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer most of my life. That would be my career, and writing was just going to be a hobby. And I remember I had gone up to Islip, New York, to review bank ground leases because a client of ours was going to take over a bunch of banks. And if I would recommend reading bank ground leases if you suffer from insomnia at any degree at all, because it will put you to sleep in about 3 seconds. And I had a script that I had written in the early 1990s. It was kind of like a Die Hard in the White House. Oh. And I had sent it out through my agent, and went out to all the studios, and there was this huge buzz about it. And agents writing back, or back then phoning back, there was no email, and saying, this is hot, this is going to be a big sale, it's going to be huge, get ready. And I remember being in this hotel in Islip after I'd spent 14 hours reviewing ground bank leases, and I got the call from the West Coast, and Warner Brothers had passed. And because studios are often sort of lemmings, all the other studios passed because they figured something had to be wrong with the script. And he was really sorry, but it just wasn't going to happen. And I remember sort of looking out the window, it was just midnight, and thinking, this is not going to happen for me. I'm not going to get the break that every writer needs. I'm not going to be in the right place at the right time. And that's really when I sat down and thought, well, I'm going to try my hand at a novel after I've written all these other types of things. And I worked in D.C., and I walked past the White House a lot. My office was very near there, and I saw the president. And I thought, a president and a tryst and a cover-up in the Secret Service. I got to tell you, the Absolute Power gave me a lot of grief, because when the book first came out, I got lots of fan letters, and the fan letters were all uniformly very enthused about the plot. Terrific idea, great story. Obviously, the plot is totally far-fetched, because the president can't have affairs. It's impossible. It can't happen.
Never.
Okay, but then you fast forward 2 years after Monica Lewinsky, and I was getting hundreds of letters from people taking me to task for writing about a national scandal for money. And one woman in particular kept after me for like 8 years. She kept writing and writing and writing, and finally I wrote her back and said, look, if you look at the copyright page on the book, it's 1996, 2 years before anybody knew who Monica Lewinsky was. I thought that would settle the matter. She wrote back immediately. It says, that proves nothing.
Now, Nelson, as someone who's written about the military from really extensively, especially in the Charm School, from the stories about how the military workings is. Is there someone out there who's done that same thing with this whole Petraeus thing with emails? The commanding general in Afghanistan somehow found time to send 20,000 emails to this woman who will be VIAfied.
Well, emails are a problem. But pre-email, Ike was having an affair with his driver, his female driver.
Kennedy?
And Kennedy, and I can't picture Dick Nixon having an affair. But almost everybody.
Well, we
else
can
I
picture it, but we wouldn't want to.
I don't picture. I don't want to go there.
So, are there no more real-life heroes anymore? Are the only place to find heroes in thrillers now?
I think the hero is a small people. They get to a position. Just vulnerable for that, and it's easy to become corrupted, obviously. The Roman emperors used to have this person following them around, whispering in their ear, you are just a man, you are not a god. This is what Roman emperors needed, and I think a lot of people in Washington need this little guy following them around. The heroes you find are at a much lower level. It is the everyday person. We just had a hurricane story. A hurricane hit our town. House near us blew up. 85-year-old man is in the house, under the rubble. House is burning. The man next door, who was a volunteer fireman, crawled into the burning house and pulled the 85-year-old man out and saved his life. Now that is heroic. I mean, and that's where you see the heroism. And we saw so much of it in Long Island, and also I'm sure the Jersey coast in the last couple of weeks. Acts of incredible heroism by regular people, ordinary people. And heroism is being smart enough to know you're afraid, and then overcoming the fear. There are a lot of heroes who are actually stupid and they don't have that sense of fear. They do stupid things. It looks heroic, but it's really dumb. Now you gotta right away say, this is a dangerous thing I'm about to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. Once you overcome that fear, I think that puts you in the ranks of the heroes.
I just keep looking to see no microphone, no questions tonight. Okay. Yes.
Well,
we have a question. A written question. I did ask for questions from the audience. There haven't been any.
Question for you.
Oh, wait a minute, we have one. Okay.
Hi. Sorry, I have a couple written down, so I just have to choose the one. All right. Do you guys have a consistent structure that you tend to use for your stories, or do you tend to vary it around or experiment?
Steve Berry?
Yeah, there's a structure. I mean, if you're asking if there are elements that have to be into the book, yes. In my genre, I need action, history, secrets, conspiracy, international settings. I need those elements, and I need a good mix of those elements. Too much of one, too little of another, I get in trouble one way or the other. So in my case, yes, there is a structure. But again, I said this earlier, here's the thing about writing these books. They all have to be the same, but they all have to be different. That's the trick. And it makes it very difficult to achieve that.
In writing a series character, what is the special challenge of having them grow? Is it important for them to grow emotionally from book to book, or do they need to stay the same person?
Oh, no, they have to grow some. I mean, there's no question. I mean, it's just the same old thing all over again. I mean, just doing the same thing,
right?
All over again. No, they have to change and evolve. There's no question. I think all of y'all. I mean, I know David's series. I mean, in his previous series, those characters changed dramatically over the course of those books, and so you do it. John Corey has changed somewhat over the books.
Has it changed?
He says a little bit.
It's become maybe more immature.
His mouth's not quite.
We have another question.
Hi, yeah, I just want to know, do you all consider yourselves at all to be dark people?
Dark?
I've read a lot of your books, and I'm a big fan. And maybe that makes me dark for loving to read them, but I'm just curious to hear your response to that.
My kids are always so disappointed I'm not a dark person. No, they expect someone scary. I walk out into school and they go, oh no, it's just some normal guy.
Not giving people goosebumps, huh?
What?
Nothing.
You didn't give people goosebumps.
She gave you a little plug. She did good.
I like to think of us as actually fairly well grounded, because we go to dark places to find resolution. And if you spend enough time, sitting around thinking red rum, by the end of the day, you're bound to smile.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Next.
I'm a Providence High School student, and I just wanted towards R.L. Stine. And I've read Rotten School and Goosebumps, and I've grown up reading those books, and I was just wondering if you were making a transition into the adult novel, serious now, and backing away from writing child horror.
No, I'm still doing 6 Goosebumps books a year. The new one is called Planet of the Lawn Gnomes. But, no, this was just an experiment for me, an attempt to try to keep up with my old audience and see if people liked it or not.
Thank you.
We really need to work on our titles. I mean,
I have great titles. They don't sell anywhere near as well as the books do. Next.
Yeah, hi, this is from the business standpoint. When you're publishing your first novel and you go to the publisher and eventually you find somebody who wants to publish your work, what percentage do they basically decide on those? What's the spread between what you guys get versus the publisher on your first novel? And then do you subsequently end up negotiating in advance that, okay, we're going to do a second one and I'm going to get this much and so forth? Can you tell me a little bit
Probably
about
the
that,
best
each of
one,
you?
Steve.
Me?
Well, I can
Is
tell
this
you
off the record or what?
I can tell you the royalty percentages are based on a model that came about fairly recently in 1773.
Pretty much.
Publishers really have not varied from that model since then, unless you really want to fight for it. But
And here's the craziest part. The ebook royalty rate was actually established at a time when there were no ebooks. It didn't even exist. That's why it's so unfair at this point. And it's all changing. This is another thing we just said about the good old days. This is totally in flux, changing constantly.
Now, I will say, from my personal experience very recently, there are companies experimenting with different models. Open Road Media, Integrated Media, which is run and owned by a woman named Jane Bernstein, who used to be run HarperCollins. That's who brought out my book, my new McCracken book, after 15 years bringing it back. There's no advance, but the royalty is 50-50.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we may be, as publishers struggle more, as advances shrink more, you know, depending on how the market moves, could we see a different royalty structure, a higher royalty structure, but a lower advance structure?
But you know, to answer the question, no. I mean, the royalties are pretty well set, whether you're a first novelist or an established novelist or a best-selling novelist. They don't change much in terms of the physical book. The ebook is is what the Authors Guild is interested. We want to be fair to Amazon. Now we don't really, but we want to be fair to the consumer. This is a great thing for the consumer to buy hardcover fiction at a good price, and the publisher and the author need to. I think we can agree on that. It's just the other people who we have problems with. Jane Friedman, by the way. Not Bernstein, but Jane Friedman. And she has another model. And there are other models out there now for some ebooks. But there are also models that seem to work for with hardcover books, which is it's not the normal, usually 15%. There are other 50-50 splits, but you take a lower advance. They give you an advance. They actually give you an advance. They say, here, but you have to earn the advance back theoretically. And David's right. I've been in this business 40 years. I don't see any change. It's like, no matter what the Authors Guild says, the agents say, the structure has stayed the same. The nice thing that is it's democratic. First novelist or best-selling novelist, you get the same lousy advance. You get a better advance and the same lousy royalties. So. In case you're looking to go into the business.
I mean, if it helps you at all, as the more junior person here, I mean, I sold my first 3 novels on my own, which meant I got a bad advance and a bad royalty. However, it meant I sold 3 novels. And that was later enough to get me an agent. Because I think right now in the industry, the other chicken and the egg argument you have is you kind of do need an agent to get a publisher, but you need a publisher to get an agent. You can, spin in that loop for quite some time. So sometimes you have to ask yourself as a writer what your goals are. Do you want to be an overnight success? I mean, it took me 10 years to get on the New York Times list. Or do you want to just get your foot in the door because this is something you believe in which case it might be that for this first book it's not the best, but by the act of doing it, you put yourself in a position. If you do get a contract at all, or you find yourself in that position, if you don't have an agent, at the very least you should get a literary lawyer to look over the contract with you. I made a fundamental mistake in my very first contract. I gave up my name, which you should never do. So it's always good to have someone else look at the contract, and they can advise you to industry norms and help you know that you're on sound footing. And good luck with your writing.
So
Wait, I think he has a follow-up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So where does can a person make a living at writing? And then is the larger money coming when the film gets sold for an adaptation?
Oh, I like this guy.
Yeah, there's no money from the film anymore. There's almost, I'm being serious.
Yeah,
there's almost nothing. That's all.
There's something.
Unless it gets made. If the money comes only if it gets made.
That's really over.
The average author makes less than poverty wage income, but that doesn't mean in the long run, like anyone in the entertainment industry,
Same with actors.
that you can't be the exception to the rule.
Sure.
So it is an industry that's defined by extremes. If you're looking to get rich tomorrow, I would just buy a scratch ticket for the lottery. If you love writing and it's what you're passionate about, and you're willing to hang in there, then absolutely. But it took me 10 years to be a self-sustaining
Is self-publishing
author.
on Amazon a viable option these days?
I don't know.
Putting up your book on Amazon as an ebook?
Depends on what your goal is. Depends on what the goal is. What is your goal? If your goal is to see your book out there for the world to look at, then
Absolutely.
it's great. It's a great option.
Yeah.
If your goal is to become an established commercial fiction writer on a long-term basis to reach a wide audience across the world, no, that's not a viable option. It's all about goals, is really
Yeah,
what it is.
I agree with Steve. I mean, sometimes in this industry, you work backwards. What are you trying to achieve?
But I think, it comes down to,
Thank
look, you should worry less about that now and worry about, your story and what you want to write and the passion that drives those pages. Because at the end of the day, if your story rises above the heap that publishers have piled on their desks, you'll be able to negotiate a good deal. You'll be able to make a living through your writing and have a successful career. But the story should be your focus right now. It really should be.
Good. Thank you.
Hello. My question is for Lisa. How do you keep your good characters? I know as far as your stories, the crazy stuff happening, the really bad stuff happening is always like really new. How do you keep your good characters from becoming predictable, even though they become more familiar?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have to say I'm almost the opposite of Steve. It's characterization that comes most naturally to me. It is the research, the plotting that I have to do more because I don't have a background. I'm not a lawyer. I was never a police officer. I don't know, the character part for me is organic. I guess I've always liked those books where the characters seem to really talk to you. I always think of the main character as being a substitute for the reader. It's the person you'd like to sit around and have drinks with. It's the person you'd like to hang out with. And the people we hang out with aren't friends. We know aren't perfect. We know our friends and family. We love them, but they're not perfect. And it's those imperfections that maybe make them grow on us. So if you have an imperfect character, but they continue trying to do the better thing, and then you give them a lot of challenges they didn't expect. Like in Catch Me, I gave my hardcore workaholic detective a baby, because that's the one thing readers would know she would not be able to handle. So if you keep doing that, you can grow and evolve a series. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is for Mr. Stine. I was just wondering, what were you most terrified by as a child, and what were you most thrilled by?
That's a good question. What was it? What was it? What is it?
Now it's lucky. I was a very fearful child, and I was afraid of a lot of things. I was very shy and very fearful, and I think that's why I stayed in my room typing when I was 9 years old. And I'd be in there typing all day. I think because I was afraid of so many things. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I used to ride my bike around the neighborhood in the evening, and I'd come back, and I was always sure something was lurking in the garage waiting for me. No, this was a very serious thing, and I would take my bike every night and heave it into the garage and run into the house as fast as I could.
Classic horror story.
It's a hard way to be a kid, I think, but later when I started writing these books, it was very lucky because I have a memory and I could think back and remember that feeling of panic and then transfer it to my books.
Wow.
Excellent.
1 second, John, we'll come to you, but we have another question who's been, okay. There we go.
No.
Back by the microphone.
A short question.
What did you do when you aren't writing books?
What do you do when you're not writing books?
Who is he talking to?
I think it's you.
I think you. I think he's talking to you.
Well, I work all day. I work pretty much all day, most days. But I live in New York City, so there's lots to do. In the afternoon, I take my dog for a walk in the park and walk around and see hundreds of interesting things just on a walk. And I love going to old movies and theater and opera and ballet, and I live real close to Lincoln Center in New York. And we do everything in New York. And I have season tickets to the Giants games and go to the Giants, and it's a great thing. I'm very happy there. Very nice question.
This is for Nelson. I find your sarcasm very endearing, and
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It sounded good.
I find your sarcasm very
sarcasm.
endearing, And do you have any like mentors that you found in that writing?
Mentors, I mean.
That are also
other
sarcastic.
people. Maybe it's kind of a New York thing, I'm afraid. It's, cynicism, sarcasm. I mean, when I was 3, I was sarcastic. I have a 6-year-old at home. It's hard to believe, I know, but to get back to what you said, he wants me to tell him stories. He wants me to write him a children's book, and one of the things I said to him, in fact, we bought him.
That's how William Goldman wrote Princess Bride.
I said, right, I don't want to. I can't do what R.L. Stine does, but when I created a lot of characters who were whatever, they were heroic. I mean, before I got to my guy at John Corey, who just came to me out of the clear blue sky, they say write about what you know, and I think I knew me, and I didn't realize that deep down, on some subconscious level, I was a sarcastic, cynical guy. And as soon as I started writing him, I knew that this was me in some ways. I don't think my wife would agree about the sarcasm, I'm sure, and and maybe the cynicism, but also the humor. I mean, he's not a cynical person per se. He's a humorous person. So no, I don't know anybody who influenced me except for me on that one.
We'll take the people who are in line, and then we'll wrap it up. So if you're in line now, you will get to ask your question. Why don't we go to this side for a change?
When it comes to doing research on your books, especially for characters, like Lisa, you said that like you said, you're not a lawyer, you're not a police officer. How does that process work?
Well, speaking for myself, who started out, I mean, I didn't have a Rolodex. In fact, one of the books I had the most fun researching was set here in Rhode Island, in Providence, where I lived for years, called the Survivors Club. And I called up the state police. I think they'd recently won for best uniform, and my neighbors were telling me they're very sexy, and I thought, there's a book. So if you are a taxpayer, I mean, you don't have to be known, you don't have to be in New York Times. If you're a taxpayer, your local law enforcement will talk to you. You need to be polite, you need to be professional. I arranged to come in to do an hour interview. One of the things I have found when talking with law enforcement is always to be open-ended. Really, true life is generally stranger than fiction. You know, what are the strangest case you ever worked? What was the most fun you ever had on a job? I remember the state police led me to the Providence police. At one point, I had the Providence police showing me crime scene photos of hands that were found with marijuana. It was somewhat disappointing because Massachusetts got the body, so they were having a turf war over the murder. His hands, I mean, it's not even the majority of the body. It was hard to argue who got the case. But if you can just be open and people like to talk about their job. And again, as a taxpayer, you don't need to have any credentials. I mean, I cold called the FBI. I mean, I cold called the body farm. I'm a writer and I want to learn about decomp. Can I come? And they went, that's odd, but why not? So for most of the part, if you're polite, you're a taxpayer, you're in.
You know, if you get a little bit better known, and we've all gone through where you just sort of become a journalist, you call a friend of a friend of a friend, you'd call anybody, cold call and try to get in, but once you've written a few books and people come to know your writing, sometimes agencies will call you up. And I had one who called up and said, would you like to come to our world headquarters in Bethesda? We can show you what we do. So they sent a car and I drove up there. And when you go into these buildings, they give you an RF badge, a radio frequency badge. It's loaded with your security clearances, and it's a wireless signal that goes out the whole time you're in the building. And if you go into a room you're not cleared for, an alarm goes off and all the computer screens go black immediately so that you can't see what's going on there. And I had no security clearances, so every room I went into, the alarms went off, and all the computer screens went black, and people looked at me and were like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, you invited me here, okay? So they showed me a lot of cool things they do. They're a military support organization for the most part, although they do a lot with maritime security and safety so ships don't collide, and they do a lot with the Secret Service to protect the president. But I was wondering why I was there, so I went into a conference room with like 12 guys from this agency. They had these big binders in front of them. We sat down at the table, and I'm sort of looking around waiting, and finally the head honcho said, have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State? And I thought back and I said, yeah, that was the one with Will Smith and Gene Hackman. It was a really cool movie. And the head honcho guy says, no, it wasn't. And I looked around at all these guys staring at me, and I said, yeah, you're right, it sucked. And why did it suck again? And he said, well, in the movie, the satellites, the spies in the sky, Hollywood said that was the NSA. And of course, Hollywood are morons. And the NSA listens on people's conversations. We are the spy satellite. We are the eyes of American intelligence. We do evil a lot better than the NSA ever thought about doing evil. And we got absolutely no credit for it in the movie, and we are pissed off. So I said, well, I can see that. Do you want to harm me in any way? Because I'd like to know that up front. He said, no, we want you to write about us in a book where we do evil really great, and that's why you're here, and we'll give you any access you want. And I said, why do you want that? And he said, well, it helps us with recruitment. He said, because the NSA and the CIA are well known in movies and books. They get the best and the brightest. We want the best and the brightest, and we'll be as evil as you want us to be in order to get them. So those are your taxpayer dollars at work.
Very disturbed individuals, by the way, there. That's
John.
very disturbing.
Wait, one last
sorry.
just practical thing. I'm sorry I didn't mention it. But if you don't know anyone and you haven't been invited in, when you do talk to someone, ask them who you should talk to next, and then use their name to call the next person.
Good point.
And now you are not cold calling. So if you can do the first cold call, you can kind of set the dominoes in play.
People love to have their names on the acknowledgments page, too. You know? And when I don't have enough people, I say, I couldn't mention all the names because they told me that way it makes it seem like I actually know what I'm talking about. John.
I'm just curious, Neslon DeMille and Steve Berry, the same question for both of you, and actually all of you, but I don't want to take up too much time. And that is, when you folks sit down after you've developed an idea for a story, do you know how it's going to come out at the end, or does it develop during the course of you writing the book?
Steve, you touched on that before.
I mean, yeah, people ask, we teach writing around the country as part of our History Matters Foundation. And in part of that, I always talk about, they ask me, where do you start a book? Where do you start a book? There's a simple answer to where you start a book. You start a book as close to the end as possible. As close to the end as you can get, that's where you start the book. Now, what does that presuppose? That you know at least generally what the ending is. So I adhere to that rule. You know, I have a general idea where I want the book to end. I have a general idea what I want to happen. It changes and it modifies, but that tells me where to start. So yes, for me, I do have where I want it to end up. Nelson,
you know, and every book is, every story, every movie is a slice of life, and you got to slice it here and you got to slice it there, and right, and you got to, you know, sometimes writers begin, as you're saying, too early, but yeah, you have to know where it's going to end, at least generally, because when you know where it's going to end, you know how to get there. You can tell books. I don't read a lot of novels for pleasure because they're not pleasurable to me anymore. I can see where the writer got problems, and it's kind of like almost torturous, you know, feeling bad for the writer sometimes, and myself included when I read my own stuff actually. But you got to get to the end. If you know where the end is, you're going to take the, you know, fairly direct line. But you're going to go off on, you know, tangents down and which makes it interesting. Books that wander in the middle or sag in the middle, it's usually because the writer doesn't know where he's going. It might be he or she might be a good writer, good strong start, you know, and then, but if you don't know where the end is, it's like running a race. If you start off on a race and they don't tell you it's a 26-mile marathon, and you don't know how to pace yourself. But if you know where it's going to end, you can pace yourself better, and I think everybody benefits, including the reader. My last book is 640 pages, probably the longest thing ever. And the funny thing is I knew where the end was, but I just wanted to go where I wanted to go. So it doesn't shorten the book necessarily, but at least the reader feels like you're going one way and not all over the place.
You know, the last two books I've done, the Pandora, which is out, which is just coming out, and Strong Rain Falling, which you have, I didn't know the endings at all. I knew Caitlin Strong was going to win. I knew Blaine McCracken was going to win. What happened organically, because that's the key, it has to function organically. In both of those books, I created settings that I didn't know were going to be in the books when I started. And the settings were so big that I said, oh my God, this is my climax. It was similar to what they did with the James Bond novels. And also, of course, the James Bond movies. The Sean Connery movies were based on what cool stuff can we build, and that's where we'll finish our movie. If you think back to Thunderball, underwater, won an Academy Award. Goldfinger, Dawn and Fort Knox. You Only Live Twice, inside the volcano with the ninjas coming in. These were the books that spawned the kind of books that a lot of us are writing. And I think I still stick with that tradition, sometimes a little too much, because it does strain. In Pandora, the credibility is really strained, but it's fun.
The reason I asked the question is I've read all of the books by both of you authors, and I think they're fantastic. Steve Berry, I've noticed, it seems to proceed along in a very, very good order with a lot of research to it and a lot of backup to it. And it seems like he's right on track, just like he said when he answered my question. But Nelson seems to be a little bit different in a sense that it seems he doesn't get off track, in my opinion. I'm not saying that at all, but I remember comments I think you made in Nightfall that you got into a corner about how you were going to not have the end come out because, and that was the Twin Towers tragedy that came about that helped you figure out the exact ending of the book. I don't know if I'm off base or not, but I thought that was fantastic, that book, and how it came, and I really enjoyed your comment at the end of it. So that showed me some sort of freedom. Am I right about that?
Yeah, well, and if I just tell everybody I don't wander around when I write, I actually do wander sometimes. My editor will be the first to say that, but I'm having fun with it. If I'm having fun, the reader's having fun. The book, Nightfall, you're talking about, was, I think, my only novel based totally on a true incident, which was the explosion of TW-800 off the coast of Long Island. And, when you start to write a book that's based on fact, I mean, really totally based on fact, and the mystery has not been resolved in real life, and it has not been with TW-800, then you probably should not have begun the book because you don't know how to end it. That was the problem I was having. How do you end a book that's based on a story that has no ending? So I should have thought of that, 12 months, 13 months before I started, but I'm writing a book and I'm realizing, and as I'm writing it, and all of us who write thrillers know that events can overtake the book sometimes, especially if you're writing about the real world, they can overtake the book. And I was afraid whatever conclusion I came to in my book Nightfall about TW-800, the book would be published like on a Tuesday, and Wednesday they'd make this huge announcement that it was something totally different than I had come up with. So, there's always that too. So you try to stick to facts, but you try to, make it fun and make it entertaining, but don't get yourself into a box like I did in that particular book.
Scott? Thank you for not abandoning it.
Thank you.
I'm a senior over at Beacon Academy, and this is an open-ended question. Do any of you actually end up pulling out inspiration from an actual conversation between two or more people?
Does anybody find inspiration in conversations between people?
I don't think we'd admit it.
You mean conversations they overhear?
No, conversations in general, because I'm actually an aspiring author, and honestly, I pull out a lot of the things that I write out of a conversation.
Well,
like, I'll pick up 2 or 3 words, and
Sure,
now open up
sure,
a brand new
that's
story
normal.
for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Does that happen with any of you?
Sure,
Sure.
that's common.
Writers are observers, we watch humanity, we watch life, and I've never taken the character, whole cloth out of real life and popped into a novel for legal and other reasons, but,
That's a problem, yeah.
but certainly idiosyncrasies, physical traits and qualities, the way people speak. Dialogue is, all of you are dialogue experts because you do it every day. You may not think you are, but when you read wooden dialogue, you instantly recognize it's intuitive, and you come to realize that people don't talk with each other, they talk at each other. And half the time, you're not listening to what your friend is telling you because you've already shut them down. You just want them to shut up so you can say what you want to say, which is far more interesting than anything they could possibly have to say. That's how people communicate. And it depends on whether you know the person well or it's a stranger, it's a first meeting, a second meeting, what the sort of the social environment is. But dialogue is a great place to listen, and that's how you learn how to write real dialogue.
Step right up.
Hi. This question is for David. I'm a big fan of the Camel Club thrillers. And I'm wondering what your inspiration has been for those characters.
The Camel Club is a series of, the most unlikeliest heroes ever. They're not young, they're not particularly fit, but they have a lot of experience and mileage and a lot of baggage. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., again, I mentioned my law office was near the White House, and I would go past Lafayette Park, and back then, before, not 9/11, before the Oklahoma City bombing, which is the reason they closed down Pennsylvania Avenue, and they sort of moved everybody out of Lafayette Park, there were lots of permanent White House protesters, I call them. They had little tents, and they had these big banners. First banner I ever saw in Lafayette Park, and it's actually still there. There's only one permanent protester left. But this big banner was, "Have a nice doomsday." And I thought maybe I should just move back to Richmond because this is kind of a weird city. But then I thought about what if there was somebody in the park who maybe had a different life way back. He was on the run, he had done something for the government, wanted to get out, they didn't want to let him. And that was sort of my catalyst for Oliver Stone, who was the senior member of the Camel Club. And that idea just sort of stuck in my head for 15 years. And when I sat down to create the Camel Club, that's where it came out. That's probably one of the most interesting emails I've ever gotten. I wrote the first Camel Club book, and it had a lot to do with terrorism. I was trying to put sort of a face on terrorism, and I had sort of 3 different types of terrorists in the novel to sort of not humanize it, but try to make people understand the environment that could spawn it, which is really, if you can identify the environment, then you can make sure that environment doesn't exist, and you can sort of really take terrorism on and get rid of it. You want to get rid of terrorism in Afghanistan, build 10,000 schools and educate 10 million girls, and the environment changes. So anyway, I wrote this novel, and a lot of people had problems with it. I got hate mail and death threats and everything else. It was really an horrendous experience, but the email I most remember was a guy wrote and said, "The only reason you can write shit like this is because you live in the United States of America where you have the right to freedom of speech, so don't ever effing exercise it."
It's perfect.
Now, I wrote Dick Cheney back. We got that all straightened out. So.
I didn't think that Dick Cheney and I would have the same taste in literature. And Reuben and Caleb and the other characters, did they derive from that same source?
The ensemble cast for the Camel Club, really after I had Oliver Stone in place. Again, I have a lot of friends who were in the military, and my dad was as well. And so the character of Rupert Rhodes sort of naturally sort of came from that. The librarian, I'm a big library rat. I grew up, it was almost like I lived in libraries, and that's where I'm a writer today because I was a reader as a kid, and I wouldn't enthrall people the same way I was enthralled by reading books as a child. And this idea of a librarian, librarian is not sort of innately heroic, at least in most people's minds. But he was also sort of a comedic foil in the novel as well. And I'm a big fan of the Library of Congress. I'm on the National Book Festival board and have gone to the festival many, many times. And I have a nice relationship, a close relationship with the people there. And so that was sort of a nice organic thing for me as well to use. And so the ensemble cast sort of rounded it out for them. And it took time because an ensemble cast is a tricky thing. You have to have the right balance, and you have to know who the leader of this is. But everybody has to have page time. It's like actors in a movie. An ensemble cast, you have to give everybody a little bit of time on screen. But I love the Camel Club, and certainly readers are reactive to it. And they'll be back.
Thank you.
Last question.
Mr. DeMille, do people ever tell you that you remind them of Rodney Dangerfield?
Rodney Dangerfield?
Oh, no. That's a good note to end on.
You think I should do more stand-up? Anything is easier than writing a book.
And how often are the 6 of you recognized on the street?
0.
Without the book jacket just lying in front of you?
Actually, 0. I mean, it's a great thing about writers. I mean, this is a true story. This actually happened. I'm sitting in the Atlanta airport, and I'm sitting right here, and there's a guy sitting right here, just where Bob is. Pulls out my hardcover, opens it up, and starts reading it. There's a big color picture of me on the back. Now, wait a minute. Right across here, 3 feet away, a guy pulls out another hardcover, starts reading it with a big picture of me on the back. not a soul paid any attention to it whatsoever. And I told Elizabeth, you got to get a picture of this because no one will ever believe me in a million years that they're reading that. That just shows you no one pays any. It's the great thing about writing. You still have your anonymity, you still have your life, and you still have that. I've never recognized ever. I don't know about y'all, but I've never had that.
But people recognize your name, right? I mean, they recognize your name, certainly. You've been around forever. You make a reservation for a restaurant, they know who you are. So, I mean, that's the good part.
That's a nice thing.
There's some benefits to it.
Yeah, do you want to hear my airport story? San Antonio Airport. I'm on a bookstore. I'm being searched. I'm being the security guy. My arms are out like this. My belt is open. He's wanding me. And he says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Where do you get your ideas?"
I'm just so tired of sitting on trains next to people reading Steve Barry. How many times?
You do.
How many times have I texted you from
He does. He sends me texts and pictures too. He sends me all that.
Him and Jim Rollins, who's another good friend of ours. We'll have him here next year. But I'm out and why not you reading me? And I start conversation. If you like Steve Barry, you'll love Jon Land. But you have an interesting story about someone who thought you were someone.
Yeah, there was my wife and I were having lunch at a restaurant, and I would look up occasionally, and I'd look across the restaurant. There was a woman there having lunch, I guess, with her husband, and she was like, every time I looked up, she was like lasered on me, until I got so scared I just stopped looking up. And a couple of minutes later, I sensed a presence next to me. I looked over, and there was the woman, and so she pushed me aside and sat down next to me in the booth, and she said, "You are who I think you are, aren't you?" Which is kind of a weird question, but I said, "Well, do you read a lot of fiction?" She said, "Oh, yes, I do." I said, "Okay, I guess I am who you think I am." She goes, "This is the greatest day of my life. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to meet you." So she turned, she screamed across the restaurant to her husband, "I was right, Joe. It is John Grisham." But there's more!
It's worse.
Yeah. So, John's a friend of mine. We've done events together. He's a great guy. I respect him a lot. At that moment in my life, I was not feeling the love for John. And my poor wife, to put it delicately, she blew iced tea out of her nose. I don't know if any of you have tried to do that. It's not that easy to do, actually. And she said very politely to the woman, that's the right genre, but the wrong author. And the woman looked mortified, and she looked at me again, and she goes, "Oh my God, are you Baldacci?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And so, obviously terribly chagrined that I was not Monsieur Grisham, she turned and yelled across the restaurant to her husband, "You were right, Joe. It is the Italian." Oh my God.
I don't know if, go ahead. I don't know if there's a better way to end than that. I don't think anybody's got that.